Hell's Angel biker sees a waitress, and it changes everything. What he witnesses sparks a chain reaction of immense power and shocking consequences. A single, silent decision becomes a declaration of war without a single shot fired. This is a story of territory, tribute, and terrifying devotion. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. You're choking, honey, slow down. Mama's got all the time in the world. The voice was soft, threaded with a patience that felt infinite. Deacon heard it before he saw its source. He just pushed through the greasy door of the last stop diner, the jingle of the bell a sharp, cheap sound against the low hum of his motorcycle idling outside. He was a pillar of worn leather and silent menace. His cut, the sacred vest of the Hell's Angels, a canvas of patches that spoke a language of violence and sovereignty. Men like him didn't just enter rooms, they altered the atmosphere, bending the light and sound around them. Conversations dipped. A trucker at the counter subtly turned his stool away. But the woman in the corner booth hadn't noticed. All her light was bent towards the girl sitting across from her, a teenager with braces on her thin wrists and a tangle of tubes connected to a small oxygen tank beside her. The girl's head lolled gently, her eyes wide and unfocused, but they were fixed on her mother's face. The mother, wearing a faded pink waitress uniform with a name tag that read Emma, was carefully spooning a pureed, unidentifiable food from a plastic container, her movements gentle as a sacrament. She'd murmur, wait for a slow swallow, wipe the girl's chin with a tenderness that made Deacon's own calloused hands feel like clumsy hammers. He stood there, a statue of cold pragmatism, and felt something alien crack deep in his chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was a coin he never carried. It was recognition. He saw the exhaustion etched under Emma's eyes, the way her uniform hung a little too loose. He saw the profound, uncomplicated love in every careful movement. In his world, loyalty was sworn in blood and sealed with violence. Here it was sworn in pureed carrots and sealed with a soft cloth on a chin. He took a booth opposite, his back to the wall, eyes scanning the room out of habit. He saw the other thing too, the lingering, predatory gaze of the bartender, a thick-necked man with a scorpion tattoo peeking from his collar, the way the cook, a sullen kid, avoided looking at Emma's booth, the faint, familiar scent of fear beneath the grease. Emma finished feeding her daughter Stella and planted a kiss on her forehead before bustling over, her pad in hand. Her smile was professional, warm but weary. Sorry for the wait. What can I get you? Black coffee, Deacon's voice was a gravel road rumble. Pie, whatever's fresh. As she fetched his order, he watched the bartender's eyes follow her, a smirk playing on his lips. When she returned with the coffee, Deacon nodded towards the booth. Your daughter. A flash of wariness, then pride. Yes, that Stella. She's beautiful. The simple words, coming from a man who looked like he'd wrestled bears for fun, disarmed her. Tears welled, but she blinked them back. Thank you. He ate in silence, a solitary king in his leather kingdom. When he was done, he pulled a roll of cash from his pocket, peeling off 5 $100 bills. He placed them under his coffee mug. Then, with a deliberation that felt heavier than any contract killing, he unpicked the single, lower rocker patch from the side of his cut, the one that simply said, California. It wasn't a club crest, not one of the sacred top or center patches, but it was a piece of the territory, a fragment of the club's claimed earth. He laid it gently on top of the bills. He walked out without a backwards glance, the diner bell jingling behind him. Emma came to clear the table and froze. Her hand trembled as she picked up the patch, the heavy stitching rough under her fingers. She didn't understand the language, but she felt the weight of it. The bartender, Paul, was beside her in an instant. What's that? He snarled, snatching the patch. His face paled. He knew. Everyone on the wrong side of the law in this dusty county knew what that piece of cloth meant. Where did he go? What did you say to him? Nothing, he just left it, Emma whispered, clutching the money to her chest. Paul shoved the patch in his pocket, his bravado returning. Forget it. It's nothing, just some trash. Get back to work. But his eyes darted to the window, searching the empty highway. The next day, the storm came, but it didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with the slow, rolling symphony of American V-twin engines. a sound that started as a distant tremor in the asphalt and grew into a tectonic rumble. From inside, the last stop, it sounded like the world was ending or being remade. Paul looked up from wiping the bar, his blood running cold. Through the grimy windows he saw them, not a dozen, not 50, a river of chrome and denim and leather, an unending procession of motorcycles gliding into the gravel lot with a discipline that was more terrifying than any chaos. They parked in perfect, ominous rows. The engines cut off one by one until the silence was deafening. The door opened. Deacon walked in first, his face an impassive mask. Behind him they filed in, men of all sizes, all bearing the winged death's head. They filled the booths. They lined the bar, sitting silently on every stool. They stood along the walls, arms crossed, 200 pairs of eyes, not glaring, not threatening, just present. The air grew thick with the smell of leather, oil, and quiet, absolute power. Emma stood frozen by the coffee station, a pot in her hand. Stella, in her usual booth, watched the silent men with wide, curious eyes. A prospect, a probationary member, walked up to the bar where Paul stood, paralyzed. The young man's voice was polite, almost courteous. Water for the brothers, and a coffee, cream, and 2 sugars for the lady. He nodded towards Emma. Paul could only nod, his hands shaking as he began filling glasses with ice water. The diner became a surreal, silent theater. 200 of the most notorious outlaws in the state, sitting in a dusty roadside diner, drinking water and coffee. They spoke in hushed, rumbling tones to each other, the conversation a low drone. One huge biker with a beard like a black thicket caught Stella staring. Slowly, he wrinkled his nose and crossed his eyes. A tiny, gasping laugh escaped Stella, a sound so pure it cut through the tension. The biker's stern face broke into a grin, and he gave her a subtle thumbs up. Deacon had taken a seat at a small table in the center of the room. He didn't look at Paul. He simply existed, a calm eye in the hurricane of reputation he'd summoned. From the back office, the owner emerged. Marcus, a man with the sleek menace of a snake, was the real power here. The Scorpions, a small-time but brutal gang, used this bar as a front and a collection point. He walked out, followed by 2 of his lieutenants, their confidence evaporating as they took in the sea of winged skulls. Marcus approached Deacon's table, forcing swagger into his step. "This is a private establishment. You and your club are loitering. You need to leave." Deacon looked up slowly. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, just as cold. "We are customers. We're being served." He took a sip of water. "The service is a little slow." "You know what this is?" Marcus hissed, leaning in. "This is Scorpion territory. You're stepping on our toes." Deacon placed his glass down with a soft, definitive click. The entire diner, already quiet, went utterly still. Even the clinking of cups stopped. "This place," Deacon said, his voice barely above a whisper yet carrying to every corner, "is under new protection. The tithe has been paid." Marcus blinked. "Tithe? What tithe?" "The patch." Deacon's gaze flickered to Emma, then back to Marcus. "You took it. You accepted it. That makes this club ground. Sovereign territory. Your protection racket is now ours, and we protect what's ours." The truth dawned on Marcus, horrifying and complete. That patch wasn't trash. It was a claim flag. By taking it, he'd inadvertently accepted a new, unimaginable landlord. To violate this new arrangement wasn't to start a fight with a few men. It was to declare war on an empire. "You can't just," Marcus sputtered. "We just did," Deacon interrupted. He leaned back. "Your monthly insurance fee from the lady, it's zero. Her safety and her daughter's safety are now part of our club's community outreach." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "We are civic-minded." One of Marcus's lieutenants, a hothead named Jake, made his move. He took a step forward, hand reaching under his jacket. He never got close. Like a well-oiled machine, 3 angels nearest him moved. No punches were thrown, no guns drawn. They simply closed in, a wall of muscle and leather, herding Jake back into his boss with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. The message was clear. Violence was unnecessary. Their mere presence was the weapon. Marcus understood. His shoulders slumped. He'd been checkmated without a single shot. With a last, hateful glance, he retreated to his office, his gang slinking after him. The tension eased a degree. The low hum of conversation resumed. Emma, her heart hammering against her ribs, moved through the room refilling coffee. She stopped at Deacon's table. Her hands were steady now. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a surge of emotion she couldn't name. Deacon looked at her, and for the first time, the ice in his eyes seemed to soften at the edges. "Saw a good thing," he grunted, "didn't like the vultures circling it." "I can't pay you," she said. "You already did," he said, nodding towards Stella, who was now showing a bearded biker named Tiny the sparkly stickers on her communication board. "That's all the currency that matters in this transaction." The occupation continued for 3 hours. Bikers cycled in and out, a perpetual rolling presence. They ordered more water, more coffee, a few plates of fries. They were impeccably polite. They called Emma ma'am. One of them, an older angel called Doc, a man with kind eyes and mechanic's hands, noticed Stella's oxygen tank regulator was making a faint, irregular hiss. Without asking, he got up, fetched a small toolkit from his bike, and in 5 minutes had it fixed and purring smoothly. Emma tried to thank him, tears in her eyes. He just waved her off. "All part of the service, ma'am." As the afternoon sun began to wane, Deacon stood. As one, the 200 brothers stood with him. The sudden movement was like a mountain shifting. They filed out, the prospect collecting money to leave an absurdly large stack of cash on the bar, more than covering their meager orders. Deacon paused at the door, looking back at Emma. "The scorpions won't bother you again. If anything, and I mean anything, makes you feel unsafe, you tell the prospect who will be here every day during your shift. His name is Daniel. He'll be having a lot of coffee." He gave a last, slow nod, and then he was gone. The roar of engines filled the world once more, then faded into the distance. The silence they left behind was different. It was clean. It was safe. The next week was surreal. Daniel, the young prospect, was true to his word. He sat at the counter from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., nursing coffees, doing crossword puzzles, and radiating a quiet, formidable aura. Paul, the bartender, was fired and replaced by a timid but kind older woman named Rita. Marcus was never seen again. Rumor had it he'd sold the bar and moved out of state. Emma's life transformed. The constant knot of fear in her stomach unraveled. She could breathe. She could focus on Stella, on saving money from the suddenly booming diner business. Truckers and locals alike now came in, buzzing with curiosity about the legendary Angel Sit-In. And Deacon came back, not with 200 brothers. Alone. Every few days, his Harley would rumble into the lot. He'd take the same booth, order coffee and pie. Sometimes he'd just sit and read a motorcycle manual. Sometimes he'd watch Emma work, that same unreadable expression on his face. The chemistry was a live wire. It was in the way the air tightened when he walked in, the way her pulse kicked up a notch, the way he'd catch her eye and hold it a second too long, a silent conversation passing between them. It was in the time he arrived just as she was struggling to get Stella's folded wheelchair into her rusty car trunk. Without a word, he took it from her, his hands brushing hers, a spark jumping at the contact. He effortlessly secured it, his movements strong and sure. "Thank you," she said, her voice breathless. "Heavy," he remarked, his gaze intense. "Not as heavy as some things I've been carrying," she replied, the double meaning hanging between them. He gave a slow, acknowledging nod. "Lighter now, I hope." "Much." One afternoon, a rainstorm caught her as she was walking to her car after her shift. She was drenched in seconds. Deacon's truck, a massive black Ford, pulled up beside her, window rolling down. "Get in," he said, not a request, but not a command either, an offer. She hesitated for only a second before climbing in. The cab was warm, smelling of leather, coffee, and him, a scent of oil, clean cotton, and something uniquely masculine. Water dripped from her hair onto his pristine seats. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Fabric can dry," he said, his eyes on the road. He drove her home, to her modest, well-kept trailer at the edge of town. He walked her to the door under a shared umbrella, his large frame shielding her from the slanting rain. At the door, she turned. "Would you like to come in? For coffee? To dry off?" The invitation was charged, her cheeks flushing. He looked down at her, rainwater tracing the hard lines of his face. The desire was there, hot and undeniable in his gaze, but he shook his head, a gesture of immense control. "Not tonight, Emma, not like this." He reached out, his thumb catching a droplet of rain on her cheek. The touch was electric, searing. "When I come in, it won't be because of the rain. It'll be because you're sure, and because I can stay." The promise in his words stole her breath. He turned and walked back to his truck, a shadow dissolving into the downpour. The club's protection was a fact of life now, but Deacon's world began to bleed into hers in other ways. He started bringing things for Stella, not toys, but useful things. A state-of-the-art lightweight stroller that could handle rough terrain, a subscription to a music service filled with soothing symphonies Stella seemed to love. Once he showed up with a specialist's business card, a renowned pediatric neurologist in the city. "Club knows him, he's good. Appointment made for the 15th. Daniel will drive you." Emma was overwhelmed. "Deacon, I can't accept all this." "You're not accepting," he said, that familiar gravel in his voice. "I'm giving, there's a difference, let me do this." It was after the doctor's appointment, which revealed hopeful new therapy options, that the dam broke. She felt a joy so profound it ached. Daniel dropped her and Stella off, and as she was putting Stella to bed, she saw the headlights of Deacon's bike in the drive. She met him outside, the night warm and stardusted. She didn't say a word. She walked straight into his arms. He caught her, his strong arms wrapping around her, pulling her tight against the hard leather of his cut. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply, as if memorizing her scent. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest, her tears dampening his shirt. "Thank you for my daughter's hope." He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs stroked her cheeks. "You gave me something I lost," he confessed, his voice raw. "A reason to protect something that isn't just territory or pride, something pure." And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a confession, a release of weeks of pent-up, charged tension. It was fire and need and a startling, deep tenderness all at once. Her hands fisted in his leather vest, pulling him closer. The world, the trailers, the stars, the distant highway, all of it fell away. There was only his mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, the solid, real feel of him. When they broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "Stay," she pleaded, her eyes shining in the moonlight. He nodded, a single, decisive motion. "I'm staying." A love story unfolded in the shadow of his other life, a life he never fully revealed but didn't hide. She learned the rhythm of it. The late-night calls he'd take outside, his voice a low, serious rumble. The occasional presence of his brothers, Tiny, Doc, the VP Mark, a serious man with eyes that missed nothing, who would come for a coffee and treat her with a respectful, almost old-world courtesy. She was Deacon's old lady now, a title that carried immense weight and protection within their code. One evening, he took her for a ride on his bike, Stella safely with a trusted nurse. The wind roared, the world blurred, and she clung to him, feeling freer than she ever had. They stopped at a cliff overlooking the ocean. He stood behind her, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her head. "This life, my life, it's not clean, Emma," he said, the words torn away by the wind. "There's darkness in it, things I've done, things I may have to do." She leaned back into his solid strength. "I know, I'm not asking for your empire, Deacon. I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm just asking for you, the man who saw a waitress and her daughter and moved a mountain of leather and loyalty to shield them. That's the man I love." He turned her in his arms, his expression fierce with emotion. "You have him, you have all of him. The empire serves the club, but my heart that serves you and Stella." The threat, when it came, was not from the Scorpions. They were gone, a bad memory. It was from a new, ambitious outfit trying to move into the territory, hearing whispers of a soft spot in the Angel's armor, a diner waitress. They made a single, catastrophic error. They followed Emma home from a grocery store one day. They never got within 100 yards of her trailer. Daniel, the ever-present prospect, spotted the tail and made a call. Emma arrived home to find Deacon already there, his face a calm mask of fury. He kissed her forehead. "Go inside, lock the door, don't come out." She obeyed, watching from the window as 5 cars pulled up, disgorging men with nervous bravado. Deacon stood alone in the front yard, waiting. Then, from the surrounding streets, The familiar, world-ending rumble began, not 200 this time, 50, but 50 was enough. They encircled the property, a wall of silent, grim-faced men. The leader of the new crew, a fool named David, tried to talk. "We just want to talk business, Deacon. We hear you have interests here." Deacon took a step forward, and David took an involuntary step back. "You're looking at my only interest," Deacon said, his voice quiet, deadly. "You followed her, you scared her. That was your one mistake." He didn't raise his hand. He didn't need to. The circle of angels tightened. There was no dramatic brawl, no cinematic shootout. It was a quiet, brutal, and efficient lesson in power dynamics. The interlopers were disarmed, their cars disabled, and they were escorted to the county line with a message carved not in flesh, but in fear. "This woman, this child, this patch of earth is sanctified. Touch it, and you erase yourself." After it was done, Deacon came inside. He went straight to the sink and washed his hands methodically for a long time. Then he walked to the couch where Emma sat, trembling. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his, which were now clean but smelled of soap and cold metal. "It's done," he said. "It won't happen again." She saw the cost in his eyes, the weight of the violence he commanded to keep her safe. She touched his face. "I love you," she said, because it was the only truth that mattered. He leaned his forehead against hers. "You are the only heaven a man like me will ever get close to," he whispered, "and I will burn down every hell to keep it." Months later, the Last Stop diner was thriving. Stella was in new therapies, showing small, miraculous improvements, a brighter focus, a stronger grip. The booth by the window was unofficially reserved for club members who were now regulars, their presence a comfort rather than a spectacle. Deacon and Emma's love was a settled, deep-running thing. It was in the coffee he made for her every morning before her shift. It was in the way she'd sew a loose patch back onto his cut. It was in the nights wrapped in each other, a sanctuary for them both. One sunny afternoon, the entire chapter rode out to the diner, not as an occupying force, but as a family. They took over the back lot for a barbecue. Music played, laughter rang out. Tiny, the giant biker, was pushing Stella on a specially adapted swing they'd installed, her delighted giggles mingling with the rock music. Deacon stood with his arm around Emma, watching. His president, a grizzled, wise man named James, clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, brother, for the club and for yourself. This is what we hold the line for." Emma looked up at Deacon, her heart full. He hadn't given up his empire. He'd built a bridge between two worlds. He used its fearsome power not to take, but to guard, not to extort, but to provide. The tithe had been a simple patch, but the ongoing payment was the love he found, a love that softened his hard edges without dimming his strength. The storm had passed, leaving not destruction, but an unshakable peace. And in the quiet aftermath, a biker and a waitress had found a love story written not in fairy tales, but in the gritty, loyal, fiercely protective language of the chosen road, a road that had led, against all odds, straight to each other. The barbecue smoke curled into the twilight, a sweet, woody scent mixing with leather and perfume. The rumble of idle conversation and the clinking of soda cans had replaced the engine roar. It was a different kind of power on display now, the power of a family, chosen and blood, in a moment of quiet celebration. Emma moved through the crowd with a platter of burgers, her movements easy, accepted. She learned their names, their quirks. She knew that Doc, the mechanic, had a weakness for her peach pie. She knew that Mark, the stern VP, had a daughter in college he was fiercely proud of. The terrifying insignias on their backs had become familiar, almost mundane. The symbols of the men who now fixed her sink, remembered Stella's birthday and called her ma'am with a sincerity that still surprised her. Stella was the heart of the gathering. Propped up in her special chair, a soft blanket decorated with embroidered skulls, a gift from the club's few female members, Lucy and Rose, she watched the men with wide, absorbing eyes. Her laughter, a rare and precious sound, erupted as Tiny produced a clean, fluffy teddy bear from behind his back, presenting it with a theatrical bow. The bear wore a tiny, custom-made leather vest. Deacon watched from his post by the grill, a rare, unguarded smile softening his face. James, the president, stood beside him, nursing a beer. "Never thought I'd see the day," James said, his voice a low rumble. Deacon Iceman Walsh, master of the hostile takeover, presiding over a hot dog roast. "It's a burger roast," Deacon corrected, flipping a patty. "And it's not a takeover, it's security." James chuckled. "It's a goddamn miracle is what it is. That woman, she thawed something in you, brother, something we didn't even know was frozen solid. It's good for the club. A man with something pure to protect fights smarter, loves harder, it roots us." Deacon nodded, his gaze finding Emma again. She was laughing at something Daniel, the former prospect now a full-patch member, was saying. Daniel, who had earned his place in part for his unwavering watch over this diner. "She roots me," Deacon agreed, the admission simple and profound. Later, as the fire pit was lit and the stars punched through the velvet sky, the brothers began to drift, offering gruff thanks and head nods before mounting their hogs and rumbling off into the night. The goodbyes were a ritual, a clasp of hands, a bump of shoulders, a muttered "later, brother." Each one included a nod to Emma, a touch to Stella's chair. She was part of the send-off now, part of the tapestry. Finally, it was just Deacon, Emma, Stella, and the crackling fire. The silence was comfortable, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant, fadding whine of a motorcycle on the highway. Today was perfect, Emma sighed, leaning her head against Deacon's shoulder as they sat on a picnic bench, Stella drowsing in her chair beside them. "It was," he said, his arm around her, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm. "James is right, you know, about you being good for the club. They see this normalcy. It reminds them what the lines are for, what the wars are supposed to protect." She looked up at him, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "And what about for you? What does it remind Deacon of?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames as if seeing another life there. "I grew up in the system," he said, the words coming slow, unearthed from a deep place. "Foster homes, chaos. The club, it was the first thing that ever made sense. It had rules, a code, brothers who didn't throw you away. Loyalty was the only currency, but it was a loyalty to the patch, to the mission. It was transactional in its way." He turned to look at her, his face stark with emotion. "You. What you have with Stella, what you've built with me, it's not transactional, it's a gift. It's the first unconditional thing I've ever known. You loved me before I could do a single thing for you except leave a patch on a table. That rewired me, Emma." Tears welled in her eyes. He so rarely spoke like this, bearing the hidden architecture of his soul. She reached up and touched his cheek. "You gave me safety, you gave Stella a chance, you gave us a future, that's not nothing." "I'd burn the world for you," he whispered, the vow terrifying and absolute. "I don't want the world burned," she whispered back, her thumb stroking his jaw. "I just want this, the peace, the quiet you." He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of smoke and hope and a future he'd never dared imagine. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "You have it, as long as I'm breathing." Weeks blended into months, a comfortable rhythm establishing itself. Deacon's life was a balancing act, but one he mastered with fierce dedication. There were club runs, meetings that lasted into the early hours, the occasional tense phone call. But there was also Sunday morning pancakes with Stella, helping Emma paint the trailer's interior a soft, sunny yellow, falling asleep on the couch with Emma curled against him, a book forgotten in her lap. The diner thrived. It became known as a neutral, safe place, strangely enough. A place where disputes were left at the door because everyone knew who watched over it. Truckers, locals, even a few curious tourists all mingled under the watchful, if discreet, eye of a club member always present. One crisp autumn afternoon, a crisis emerged, but not one of violence. Stella developed a severe respiratory infection. The local hospital was overwhelmed. Emma, frantic, called Deacon. Within an hour, Doc was at the house with his medical kit. But more importantly, Deacon had made calls. By evening, a private room was available at the best children's hospital in the state, 2 hours away. A renowned specialist, a friend of a club connection, was waiting. It was the club's network, its vast, unseen influence, wielded not for profit or power, but for mercy. Deacon drove them, his truck eating up the miles. He stayed in the hospital room, a looming, leather-clad sentinel who intimidated the nurses until they saw the way his large, tattooed hand would gently adjust Stella's oxygen tube, or the way he'd quietly hand Emma a cup of tea when her tears fell. His presence was a fortress. After 3 days, Stella turned a corner. The doctor gave the all clear. As they prepared to leave, the specialist, an older man with kind eyes, pulled Emma aside. "Your daughter has remarkable care. The speed with which she was brought here, it made all the difference. You have quite a resourceful family." Emma looked over at Deacon, who was carefully bundling Stella into her warmest blanket. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with love and gratitude, "I do." On the drive home, Stella slept in the back, her breathing even and clear. Emma reached across the console and took Deacon's hand, lacing her fingers with his. He brought her knuckles to his lips. "Thank you," she said, "for your family." "Our family," he corrected, his gaze steady on the road ahead. The culmination came not with a bang, but with a question. It was a quiet Tuesday. The diner was empty except for old Rita behind the counter and Stella in her booth, coloring with intense concentration. Deacon sat with Emma in his usual spot, sharing a slice of pecan pie. He'd been quiet all morning, a contained energy about him. Finally, he pushed his plate aside and reached into the inside pocket of his cut. He didn't pull out a weapon or a wad of cash. He pulled out a small velvet box, worn at the edges. Emma's breath hitched, her hands flew to her mouth. He didn't get down on one knee, that wasn't his style. He simply opened the box, revealing a simple, stunning band, not a diamond, but a deep blue sapphire flanked by 2 smaller, glittering stones. It was elegant, strong, and uniquely beautiful. "Emma," he said, his voice gravelly with emotion, "I don't have pretty words. My world is built on actions, so here's my action. I'm offering you everything I am. The man, the club, the protection, the darkness, and the light I found because of you. I'm offering you a life that won't always be easy, but will always, always be safe and loved. Be my wife. Let me be Stella's father in every way that counts. Let me build a real home with you. Not in my world, not in your old world. In our world." Tears streamed down Emma's face. She looked from the ring to his eyes, which held a vulnerability she'd only ever seen when he looked at her or Stella. This was the ultimate risk for a man like him, offering his heart, not just his strength. "Yes," she whispered, the word bursting from her. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Then he stood, pulling her up into a kiss that was both a seal and a promise. From the booth, Stella let out a happy, wordless sound and clapped her hands together. Old Rita let out a whoop from behind the counter. "About damn time," she cackled. The news spread through the club like a benevolent wildfire. That weekend, the Last Stop diner was closed for a private party. This time, it wasn't an occupation, it was a celebration. The place was packed with brothers and their families, music blared. There was no hushed tension, only roaring laughter and heartfelt toasts. James stood and raised a glass. "To Deacon," he boomed, "the coldest, smartest son of a bitch I know, who went into a diner for pie and found his goddamn soul. And to Emma, the woman brave enough and strong enough to take it on, and wise enough to see the king inside the soldier. You've made us better, you've made him better." To the future old lady. A thunderous "to the old lady" shook the rafters. Later, as Deacon and Emma shared a slow dance in the cleared center of the diner floor, surrounded by the raucous, loving chaos of his brotherhood, she rested her head on his chest. "You never gave up your empire," she murmured, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. "No," he said, his voice a vibration she felt through her whole being. "I just finally found what an empire is for, to shelter what you love." He held her close, the sapphire on her finger catching the light, a small, brilliant beacon in the warm, noisy, perfectly imperfect world they had built together. The storm had long passed, and in its wake, it had left not ruins, but the unshakable foundation of a forever. Thank you for being part of this powerful story of love and loyalty. What would you have done in Deacon's place? Subscribe now and tell us your city in the comments. Let's see where in the world this story has touched hearts.